Hello, I'm Sandra Higgins, and we're filming tonight from the viewing room, Hansard Muse. It's a pop-up gallery. I have a space in Bath, and I've come to London to exhibit the 18 distinguished artists that I have in my online gallery. I feel that artists should speak for themselves, and I think the best way to get artists to express themselves, because in the past they've told me they're hesitant, they don't want to write about their work, they don't want to speak about it. And when you have artists in dialogue with one another, similar artists or dissimilar, talking about the similarities and the dissimilarities, they sometimes come up with splendid observations of their own work as well. So I think it's a very exciting thing to do. FIONA McINTYRE and LOUISA BURNETT-HALL are two colorist artists, and they're going to be discussing their palettes. FIONA is more, she probably hates this, an academic painter, so she applies her paints with a brush and sponges, but in a more controlled way, whereas LOUISA is more spontaneous, paints flat, and uses rags in her feet and whatever is necessary. So there's a tremendous amount of action in LOUISA's paintings, and there's a lovely kind of overlapping and atmosphere in FIONA's. Well, thanks for both of you coming along to the viewing room. I've called you colorists, so do you think you are? I mean, that's my category. What do you think? How do you use color, and what does it mean to you? What colors do you use? Maybe you could both chat about that a bit, yeah?
Yeah. You want to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? What does it mean to be a colorist? Because obviously if you're a painter, you're going to be using color. And there are lots of different ways of using it. So I think it takes me back to we both studied at Edinburgh, which I think is an interesting similarity. But we were taught to start introducing tiny amounts of black into our palettes. But having done my first year in an English art school, they had a very different idea, and they were following the Impressionist palette, where you absolutely were forbidden from using black, and you had to mix it. So you created a very pure black out of basically primary colours. So that might be an alizarin mixed with a Prussian blue.
I think my experience was a bit different. I was doing the art history and the painting, but we were both there at the same time. And nobody told me what to do. We just had to find out and get on with it ourselves. So, I was actually there was lots of drawing, and I was really just enjoying using loads of charcoals and pencil and oil pastels and mixing. And eventually it was all black and white, really. A lot of... and then the printmaking was black and white, and that was wonderful. So I think the colours were fairly literally related to the subjects, the subject matter, the still lives. I think I naturally used a lot of black, and it wasn't a problem. You found it was a problem for you using black?
I think I slightly struggled with it to begin with, but later I've embraced it. Because I realised that you can develop a much broader range of really interesting hues.
When did you said later you embraced the black and use of that? When was that?
Actually, relatively recently, I'd say probably about sort of 3 years ago, maybe. There is a tiny amount actually in these paintings here. What I mean by that is I'm not using raw black at all. I'm using very pure colours, and then I'm introducing just a tiny little bit of it to basically make what's known as a hue. And
so you can mix a warm black or a cool black.
Yeah, but you're not really mixing the black. What you're doing is you're darkening the colour in a very, very subtle way, but you have to do it in a very subtle way.
I find where I've lived, it's really affected the kind of my palette, and so Edinburgh was very strong. When I was using colours, they were very strong colours because there's that strong light. It's very vibrant, and there's that red earth of the borders and kind of the drunken trees across the crests of the hills, and there's very particular lights there.
Would you describe that as it's a sort of northern light, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
When was
that's
it you went afterwards? Because you said you went.
Well,
abroad, didn't you?
I went to
Yeah.
Sweden, so
Yeah.
I lived there for 7 years, and so that's very much Northern Light. And, but interestingly, I started introducing huge amounts of black into my work. It's funny how one's palette can change quite dramatically. And then it was only when I came back to the UK that pure colour started creeping back. And what really did it for me was a trip out to India. I spent a month completely immersed in baking hot sun down in the south, and I came back and it was really dramatic, the effect on my painting. And suddenly I was making these incredibly vibrant, very gestural paintings and working on the floor as well. Lots of canvases and chucking paint at them. So I think you're right. I think environment is really important.
Was it oil paint you were using? What was it? What technique was it?
Well, I was using. Yeah, I was using. I veered between acrylic and oils, actually. Interestingly, so I might sort of. The first layers might be acrylic, and then I would be using oils.
Yeah.
So, and then I went through a phase of only using acrylics for about 10 years.
Because I've just changed, I'm using acrylic a lot now. I might use a bit of oil to intensify the colour, but you can't chuck, well, I find I can't chuck oil in the same way as you can chuck acrylic.
So both of your works here deal with water. That's been a theme with your work for a long time, hasn't it, Louisa?
Yeah, I've been working on theme, I think, almost 30 years now. Before that, I was working a lot from landscape and theme of movement and the rocks and layers and what's visible, what's invisible is really what interests me. And then I'd just gone to an aquarium and taken a few photos, and when I got them back, it's like, this is it, because it's the web of light on the surface, and you could see reflection above, you could see sort of fish below, but bits of them, so just sort of bits of colour.
So when you were doing landscape, were you using more earth colours?
The Scottish ones were earth colours, I'd say. And
so
then
ochres, siennas.
Yeah, but then with the bright greens as well, because it rains a lot, so vegetation would be very strong, could be strong greens. Then in the early 90s, I'd done a series based on the ochre quarries in Roussillon in the south of France. And those were really sort of hot, there were reds and oranges and yellows, and there were lots of swirling movement. I like the energy in landscape, and I think that's and I think that's what I was thinking. My work's really all about movement. The theme of water, I first started looking at, I was still quite figurative. I think the landscape, there's more stronger figurative elements, whereas I'm happily looking straight at water, which is so abstract in itself. I was looking at fish within water, how there's a lot of optical, there's refraction, reflection, fragmentation, that interested me as well. Different spatial dimensions, in fact. But of course, you end up with a lot of blue, and I do enjoy blue. Water is it's a narrative or a story, and it's constantly flowing, or we hope it will be constantly flowing, and each picture is like a little slice in time. And so, in fact, for this series, I'd spent a week in this place, and I'd done sketches, and they followed along a stretch of stream. So the composition, there's actually 12 in all. So the composition is connected, but each section is individual. Although the first three do work well I do tend to work on 2 or 3 at once, and the first 3 can be grouped together.
You both spent a lot of time in Iceland, didn't you?
Yeah.
That's a piece of
Yeah.
it. And you have the series in the browser called Continuum,
Yeah.
Louisa.
Yes.
And then you created a series as well, Fiona. You compare your
Yes, that's
experiences
right.
in Iceland.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it?
I wanted to go, I think looking for this energy, that's why I wanted to go. And I wanted to see waterfalls, and so I was not disappointed. Lots of them.
Was that your first trip to Iceland?
Yeah. So it wasn't that long, but I got a lot of material from it, and then I worked afterwards back in the studio, which is often, as I always have worked. I've gone out, got my material, and come back and done the work in the
So that's
studio.
similar to how I work, really.
Yeah.
Going and immersing yourself within the landscape,
Yeah.
getting to know it, because you have to build a sort of relationship with it, don't you?
Yeah.
And sort of building up lots of different types of memories, not just visual, but you know, what I call muscle memories, and you know, sounds that you hear and smells and everything, and then take that all back into the studio.
Well, it was very short, but it was summertime, so the days, it was almost like it was twice as long because the days were so long, because it was July, so it was hardly any night. At the time I was working a lot on, I would use, it's called Brou de Noix in French, it's the walnuts.
Oh yes, walnut.
Ground walnut or something.
Yeah. So you've been using it.
I was
like
using that.
pigment.
I would do that. Well, I had bottles of the pigment, and some were coloured as well. I'm not sure what with, but when I got them in Belgium, and just from an art shop, I thought, oh, that looks interesting. And you can make a huge quantity with just a teaspoon or two, and so I would use those to create the first layers or the composition or so that's why it's very gestural. And then I was working with oil pastel afterwards. So really quite
really
big,
interesting.
big drawings.
So you both said that you are, and I think Louisa was particularly interested in the energy in landscape and in water, and I wondered whether you feel therefore very affected by climate change and what's going on in the world, and when you really look at the climate, or if you look at trees, you are influenced by everything that you read in the papers and know that's going on in the world as well.
I'd say yes.
Yeah,
definitely.
How could you not be?
Exactly.
I mean,
Especially as an artist. I mean, and especially because we're both interacting with the landscape.
The theme of water, I do feel is, it's more precious than gold. I've always felt it. And when I went to Iceland, some of the work I did on the glaciers, I was using a lot of sort of snow, but there was a lot of bright reds involved, which was used in an expressive way, partly because down below the surface there was the volcanoes simmering away and you weren't quite sure when it would explode, but also because the ice was melting, and so there's what looked cold to us is actually unnaturally warm.
I sort of rejected acrylics. I had a bit of a sort of epiphany where I don't know, I reacted against the fact that I suppose I realised it was basically liquid plastic. So I actually went back to oils, and then I wanted to go even further back. So I started sourcing materials myself, such as ochres, which you can source very easily locally in almost any part of the world. Perhaps our interests in some of these materials is in part a reaction.
With the
I don't know what you think, but I certainly feel that for me it's been a reaction. I think it started off as a subconscious thing, maybe when I decided to start understanding natural, purer materials, so to speak. What happens is they take you on an adventure. You go back in time, and then you start discovering all the ancient history, and it's absolutely fascinating.
I just can't thank you enough for coming along and sharing your opinions with us. And thank you so much, all of you, for coming and participating in your questions. And, we've had a great time. Thanks.